Hi, welcome to today's LinkedIn Live called Finding the Light at the End of the Tunnel. We're going to look at resilience and strategies to stay resilient, but also strategies to get into resiliency. I think this topic is super important right now, and I'm glad that you're here. And I encourage you to stay until the end of the webinar. Um, if you're here, put in perhaps a comment why you're here, where you're from. I always love to see where people are coming from. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'd love it if you subscribe to my channel and if you liked the video. My name is Dr. Barbara Schwark. I'm an executive and life coach. I've been coaching for 25 years, people from all over the world. And mainly I focus on helping people to get unstuck. So this could be an executive who is feeling that her or his leadership style is not really having an impact. Could be a small business owner who doesn't know how to scale their business. Could be somebody who has a really low or not strong enough internal dialogue with themselves about or herself about getting things done. I have a special technique called neuroemotional coaching, and we really work with the deeper layers of consciousness to get congruent with the things that we want, the goals that we want, and so that we can create the life that we really dream or wanted to always have. Now, these days, a lot of the coaching that I do has to do with staying resilient. For those of you who do not know, I live in Israel, and Israel is a little bit of a challenge right now, and I'm smiling about it, but there's something really serious about this as well. And I want to start with a story, okay? So I think it was this week, actually, when I went to my yoga session. I go about 2 or 3 times a week, and it's actually super relaxing and really good for me because it helps me to stay resilient and to release the stress. At the beginning of the yoga session, the yoga teacher said, listen, if there's a siren alarm, if there's a missile attack, don't worry, everybody. There is a bunker in the basement. And namaste. And I was like, oh my God, this is so crazy that here I am at the session. And the first thing that we're talking about is, what's going to happen in the case of a missile attack. So that's just a little bit of the craziness that we experience here in Israel. And when I look at what's going on with people, I can see that, for instance, my children, they're definitely more afraid to do things on their own. And I can see that people are more aggressive, especially when you're on the road. People are driving like crazy, and people are less open to feedback, and they're much more defensive. And all of that, of course, has an impact on the personal life and an impact on the business life. If I'm a business owner and I'm giving some feedback to my employees and they can't take it and they're being resistant and fighting with me, we're going to have a hard time moving things forward. But it's not like this in Israel. So as I told you, I coach people around the world. I have clients from California all the way to India and anywhere in between. I can see that in general, people are less open to feedback. Companies are struggling to be innovative. Companies are struggling to do more with less. And people are personally struggling because illness on the rise. There's more heart attacks. There's more any of those illnesses that are directly related to stress. So it's super important that we look at this. And, I just sent out a newsletter. And by the way, if you're interested in getting my newsletter, which helps and lets you know about upcoming events, I talked about my parents. My parents were born in 1936 and 1939, which sort of like the beginning of World War II. And my father especially had to overcome so much trauma. And then he went on to be, the CEO of a company, and he had 3 children, actually had 6 children, and managed. And I asked myself, how did these people who had to experience so much, and there was so many millions of people that experienced so much trauma and devastation, how did they stay resilient? Where was this coming from? So, and of course, what we're experiencing today, no matter where you are, is certainly challenging, but it's nothing in comparison to what people experienced in World War II. So with that, I'm going to get straight into uh, actually, I want to tell you another story, a story about resilience. So when I was 22, I went to Nicaragua. I had been in Berlin and I was a volunteer and I wanted to continue with my volunteer service. And a few friends of mine were going, and I thought, this is a great opportunity. And we went with an organization, and the purpose was to construct a house that would give women independence, independence from their husband, independence from their family, and they could make their own money. And I love this idea because at a young age, I was already a feminist, and I thought this is really, really important. I want to help these women. And we were told that we were going to go to a small village, and in this small village, there was no electricity at the moment, but it would get restored very quickly. And we were also told that there was no running water at the moment, but no worries. There was a little tiny piece from a pump that needed to get replaced, and soon everything was fine. And not to worry, there's a big river, and you could jump into the river and have a great time at the end of the day, and the water was clean. We got to Nicaragua. I got to my little village, Los Rizos, and it didn't take very long for us to find out that there wasn't any running water, and it wasn't going to get fixed anytime soon. And there was no electricity, and it wasn't going to get fixed anytime soon. Every once in a while, we had a generator. And what really made it a whole lot worse for me was there was no river. There was a little tiny, I don't know, stream. It took a half hour to get to the stream. You had to go down the valley. There was this dust everywhere, this fine sand. By the time that you got there, you were, sweaty and you had like dust all over you. By the time you went back to your little hut, you also had dust everywhere. So it was incredibly difficult. In addition to that, there wasn't enough food, and I developed all kinds of stomach issues, and you could only imagine we didn't have clean water. And so every day I went to bed hungry or with a stomach ache. And that went on for 3 months. And it was a very challenging time. And the way I really dealt with it, the way I stayed resilient was in a couple of ways. Each day I reminded myself why I was there. And that essentially, even though I was suffering at the moment, it was difficult, I was assisting people who were so much worse off. And I also reminded myself that it wasn't going to last forever. I wasn't going to live in this place for the next, forever, but it was a finite time, and eventually I would be leaving. And the third thing that I opened myself up to, and I think this is really what helped me, is I opened myself up to receive love from these people that lived in the village. And it was really a wonderful experience. And even though it's so long ago, I can still remember the people and how they cared for us and how they did their very best to assist us. My family would do my laundry and they would help me in any way that they could. So that is how I dealt with a very challenging situation, and I stayed resilient. And honestly, it was one of the most impactful times in my life because it really helped me to appreciate running water. I take a shower today and I say, oh my God, that's the most amazing thing. Or we have electricity. So I don't take these things for granted because I know what it's like when you don't have it. So that's my story today. And if you're listening, I encourage you to think about your stories because we all have them. We all have story of resilience, of where we were able to deal with the challenges. And we looked them straight in the face and said, this is what I did. And it's important that you remind yourself of those stories and that you have a reference point, because sometimes it's so challenging what we're dealing with that we forget. And so take some time, maybe today, maybe this week, and write out some of these stories that you have where you were resilient. So what is resilience? Resilience is really the ability to deal with challenging situations. And oftentimes, when we are dealing with a challenging situation, it triggers something inside of ourselves. And it could be physical or it could be emotional. And I want to actually say that it could also be spiritual. And the resilience basically speaks to your ability to deal with it. But it's not just how to deal with it, but it's also the ability to thrive in difficult situations. Some of us are wired in such a way, and I'm a little bit like this, that when there's a crisis, it's like my brain gets really sharp and I'm able to come up with better solutions than when there's not a crisis. So it's something that I have developed over time, of where I'm able to call upon that part in my brain and say, okay, now you have to really think really sharply, and you have to think about how you can move yourself forward. It's something that you can learn. So there are basically also fundamental skills that you can teach yourself ahead of time that will then help you to be more resilient when things are showing up, whether that's you lost your job and you don't know what to do, or you're facing an illness, or there's an economic crisis. So, no matter what the universe brings you, or what your family brings you, resilience is the ability to deal with it at the time. I want to talk a little bit about the science of resilience. So, because I think it helps us to understand how we function as human beings. And when we talk about the science, we always need to talk about the brain, because the brain is the part that controls everything. It decides why you showed up today. It decides why you fell in love, and why am I wearing this particular shirt, or why am I living in Israel? And it also, of course, decides and controls all the muscle movement, the memory, everything about us is really connected to our brain. We can be without other body parts, but we cannot be alive with our brain and functioning. And as a matter of fact, I'm not a doctor, but I know it's not a whole lot of time that you have to stay alive when your brain is not functioning. So let me do a little brain surgery. I promise it won't hurt. And I will explain to you how the brain functions. So basically, we have three parts. We have what's called the neocortex, we have what's called the reptilian brain, and have what's called we have the neocortex, we have the limbic brain, and we have the reptilian brain. So the neocortex is the part of the brain that deals with anything that has to do with analytics. So thinking, analyzing things. Also, language comes from this part. It's housed there. And I always say housed because it's really a biochemical chain reaction that you are experiencing. And I know we don't really experience it, but it's like that. It's like biochemical. And this part of the brain is the only part of the brain that is conscious. Conscious meaning that we have an awareness of it. So right now, your neocortex is listening to my neocortex producing words. And we need the words because without words, it's really difficult for us to move ourselves forward. We think, and we think in words. So when I say, I want to go to San Francisco, and I'm thinking, I want to go to San Francisco, I have words. And so words are super important. And all these elements come from the neocortex. The neocortex, because it's conscious, is important for us in order to create things. Because as we're creating things, we're using our intellectual capacities and in conjunction with the words, and that is what helps us to really create visualizations. Now, I said conscious, and what I mean by that is that technically speaking, we can control our thoughts. You know how difficult that is. I can maybe not control my thoughts, but I can change them, or I can say, stop, I want to think about something else. And I can also supposedly control what I'm saying. And we all know how difficult that is. I oftentimes in my coaching session, I ask people, not to use the word try, or, some of us, we say a lot, and we have these filler words, and it's difficult for us, including myself, to change that. So we have control. And if we don't practice, we don't have that much control. The next part of the brain is called the limbic system. The limbic system is the part of the brain that produces, again, biochemically, all of the emotions. It also regulates your temperature. So if you have the sense of, I'm really hot or I'm really cold and there's some strong emotions going on, it's because that part of the brain is working really, really hard. Now, emotions are not something that we can control because they're instant. We get triggered either positively, neutrally, or negatively. If it's positively, no problem. If it's neutrally, no problem. The negative triggers, we, depending how intense it is, we struggle with. And while we can't control that, we can certainly control what we do with it afterwards. And this is something I'm going to be talking about because it relates to being resilient. This part is called subconscious, meaning we can get to it, but it's not so easy. And most of us, if I, especially when I'm talking to my coaching clients, they say, oh, I'm a very intellectual person and my feelings are, I don't know. And I'm like, it's impossible. We all have feelings. So some of us are really working very, very hard to push your emotions down. Okay. And some of us are looking at your emotions and saying, oh my God, this is it. This is the reality. No, it's not. Emotions are biochemical reactions that are being produced based on some reality that you have. And the reality is not always the real reality. Okay. So a lot of the stuff that's going on there are actually triggers. Then we have the reptilian. The reptilian is the fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn. Fawning meaning pleasing. And that's our survival brain. And the survival brain is a big part of our brain. And it's all about survival. And it's 2024, and it's still functioning for many of us like it functions thousands of years ago. We have loss aversion, meaning we want to hold on to the crappy stuff that we have. We don't like to step outside our comfort zone. On and on and on and on. And we deal with things by assimilation and association. So if I had a bad experience with something red in the past, my unconscious will remember that and will react accordingly. And so oftentimes we are in this kind of emergency situation, even though there's nothing really going on. Our emergency system is going ring, 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 ring. And yet, you look around and you say, everything is okay. So you're constantly dealing with survival. Now, fawning, pleasing is super important. And recently, people have talked about this more because the fear of being abandoned, the fear of being left alone is a real one. Because when we lived in the cave, the only time you were left alone is when they sent you off to die. So we fawn, we please, we avoid conflict, we want to belong because we don't want to be alone. And even though you say to yourself, Barbara, I like to be alone, I like to be alone too, there's still this element of pleasing because we also like to be liked. So that is the brain, and the brain is involved with all of that. So one more thing, 90% of us is the subconscious and the unconscious, and only 10% is your willpower. So as we're dealing with resilience, it's super important that we understand about the emotionality and the unconscious, because oftentimes those two parts of the brain really come into play. And this intellectual part of the brain is kind of like watching the whole thing. So we need to be present to what's going on with our emotions, and so that we can stay resilient and support ourselves in challenging times. I want to talk a little bit about a study. So in 2022, a study published by Nature Human Behavior said that people with higher resilience had better long-term mental health, especially following trauma. And, I don't want to talk much about intergenerational trauma, but it exists and goes back 2, 3, some people say 7 generations. Everybody has been traumatized. If not in this lifetime, it is a function of the parents, grandparents, and so forth, of what you have or what you were left with, with the DNA of your family. So let's talk a little bit about the emotional journey. How do I navigate my anxiety, my fear, as I'm looking into the future? Something happened. What do I do with it? And the common response to whether it's a perceived threat or it's a real threat is fear, anxiety, helplessness, uncertainty. And like I said, it could be that it's real, that you're perceiving it, but it could also be because it seems like there's a threat. And we can't often separate the two because it's like we're not sometimes in those parts of the brain, we're not that smart. Now, one of the really important things in staying resilient is to acknowledge emotions. And it's actually a huge, huge strategy. So, what we like to do is we like to cart things under the rug. We don't like to feel these things. And then we do all kinds of maneuvers so that we can't, uh, you know, drinking, drugging, sexing, watching Netflix, working all the time, or whatever it is, whatever your vice is, people do it. And what I'm suggesting is that rather than doing that you actually find a way to be with your emotion. And it could be very challenging because sometimes the emotions are very overwhelming and it seems like we can't find the space inside of us to deal with it. When I went to coaching school, there was a brilliant technique that we were taught, and it was called in the tube coaching. I went to the Coaches Training Institute, and I use this a lot with myself, with my kids, with my clients. And it's simply for you to be present to your emotions and sometimes to go into it even deeper. And what you will experience, rather than you spending the energy of staying, stuck or staying where you in a particular place, you just go down. You just allow yourself, to go down into the bottom. And inevitably, what happens for most of us when we're in the bottom is that we bounce back up because it's like there's nowhere else to go. So it's just like really go down, boom. You hit the ground and then you bounce back up. So like you have this U-shaped tube. And I encourage you to do it and see what happens for yourself. So we want to acknowledge the emotions. We want to be with them. If the emotion is so overwhelming, another tool that I suggest is that you take a piece of paper and a pen, and then you start to write. And you do something that's called free-form writing. It's another tool that I received from a spiritual teacher many, many years ago. And there's two rules. A, you don't read it, and B, you destroy it right afterwards. And it's a wonderful way to get out all these emotions and just like dump it on a piece of paper. And because you promised yourself that you will burn it and not read it, we're often more authentic. And if you're having trouble getting into it, you write whatever's on your mind. I have trouble getting into it. I don't know what to write. And that's like, or I'm angry, or I don't want to deal with it. This is terrible. I don't want to be here. This is too much. And on and on and on. Like I wish I had that tool actually when I was in Nicaragua. I didn't. So freeform writing is a wonderful tool to create a vessel for yourself to deal with the emotions and to find a healthy way to get them out. Mindfulness breathing is another strategy that I recommend. And it's of course hard when you're so emotional. So I recommend that you do these other two things first, because how can I be mindful when I'm like, all, emotional and bent out of shape? What you can do, however, is breathe. And there's a wonderful book that was on the New York Times bestseller. It's called Breath. It's by James Nestor. I've recommended it to many, many, many of my clients. And you read about the history of breath, and it's fascinating. And at the end of the book, or throughout the book, there are a lot of exercises. And, in the Eastern world, people have been practicing different kind of breathing for a long time. And also a Dutch guy named Hoff has made this particular kind of breathing, fire breathing, very popular. So check it out, because what it will do is it will calm you down. It does something to your brain and your central nervous system, and it helps us to think clearer and to be present, and so that we can develop strategies. And then maybe do some mindfulness. And mindfulness is not sitting around and thinking about nothing, because that's not how our brain is constructed. Mindfulness is to become present to what's going on around you, and so that you can have greater abilities and control over directing your consciousness. Two more things I want to talk about. One is distraction. So sometimes I think distraction can be very good. I would suggest that you do healthy distractions, such as maybe doing some exercise, going for a walk. Could also be talking to a friend, getting some support. Maybe even sometimes watching a movie. Watch an uplifting movie or listen to a podcast. Those are distraction or interruptions or disruptions that can be very helpful because it takes you to another track. Here's another study from the Journal of Traumatic Stress from 2023, and it says that mindfulness-based interventions significantly reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression in people who had life-threatening events. So it speaks about emotional resilience. Okay, let's talk about some practical strategies for building resilience. First of all, if we're looking at the mental, one of the things that I can adopt, and I think this is good in general, is to adopt a mindset that looks at growth. And growth doesn't mean that you have to get more money or that you have to, bring in more. Growth means that you're interested in learning something, that you're interested in moving something forward. And I think actually our soul, our innate nature is to grow, to step outside the comfort zone. So look to see, like, where are you? Are you somebody that says, yes, I'm moving forward. I want to grow. I want to learn. I want to maybe let go of something that's no longer serving me. Or am I somebody that, stays stuck and or stays in old situations or stays in the old paradigms? So it's very important that mentally you adopt a positive mindset. And another way to look at this is to focus on wins, or focus on things that I actually want to create and that I can make happen. And usually we all feel good when we have a win and we move ourselves forward, and because it produces a feeling of that I can do, and it produces an internal conversation that makes us feel good. One of the ways that you can really support yourself in this is by another coaching skill that I learned at CTI, and that's acknowledgement and championing. So acknowledging is looking at things that happened in the past, and championing is looking at things that are going to happen or things that you want to take on. And when we acknowledge ourselves, and it could be for very, very little things. So let's say my growth is about getting up in the morning because I really don't feel like it. And I acknowledged two things. One is my beingness and one is my doingness. So getting up in the morning could be I am being disciplined. That could be my doing skill. My being skill could be that I love myself. So you want to, when you acknowledge yourself, look at that and then say that to yourself. When they developed or when they taught us the skill was really for how to deal with other people. But I think one of the wonderful or the best kept secret is to use this acknowledgement and championing with yourself, championing about the future. Like, I'm going to Jerusalem today. I have a, challenging meeting, and I'm championing myself that, I'm disciplined. I'm going to be sharp. I'm prepared. I know how to relate to people, and the meeting is going to be great. So that is how I, champion myself about things that are difficult. So it's a skill that you can use that will help you in many, many, many different ways, but it definitely helps you when you want to stay resilient and develop a stronger sense of tools of resiliency. What else? Another, and I mentioned this a little bit already, is the support system. I think really is important for us to have support systems, and sometimes could be friends and family. Of course, I'm a coach, so one of the big things that I do for my clients is to be their support. People come to me, they tell me everything. They ask me, how should I deal with this? Or what do you have to say about it? And can you support me? And oftentimes the job of the coach is to hold the space until the person can see themselves and manage themselves in their space that they want to be in. So I can see you having accomplished this already, and I will support my clients the best way I can in order for them to reach that. Staying realistic when creating goals. So one of the ways to stay resilient is to be realistic. So if I have a crazy goal, and I know I'm going to fail, this is not a good way for me to support myself. So stay realistic, and a good gauge is 50%. So if I can see myself 50% doing it, then it's awesome. If I can't, maybe I want to scale back. And within time, when you build that muscle, you can actually maybe increase it a little bit, but stay in the 50% because it really feels good when we have wins, because it wants us to be more resilient, wants us to step more outside the comfort zone. So have realistic goals. Self-care routines is a very strong strategy to stay resilient. So I have a morning routine, I do some writing, and I deal with my day, and I think about how I want to experience myself, what's my intention, that sort of like emotional experience that I want to have. Then I look at the goals that I have, and it's a good routine for me to start my day. I say a prayer when I get out of the morning. When I get up in the morning, it's like maybe I sit on my bed and I sort of send light and love to my day, and I let go of any negativity that may have come up at night. And then I think about how I want to experience my day. And sometimes it works out. Sometimes my day is just like that. And sometimes it's not. But I set the intention and put in sort of into the universe of how I would like it to be. And when I don't have time to, actually sit down and write, because I've done it so many times, it's like automatic. I can, just think about it and it will happen. And part of my morning routine, and it's actually another strategy to stay resilient, is gratitude. So I talked about Nicaragua earlier, and really with that experience, it stays that I'm grateful to have a house or a place to live, and I have running water, and I have electricity, and there's food, and no matter how bad it is. And maybe these days I go to the supermarket and a lot of things aren't available, but still I have choices. I can go. I have a car. I can drive around, and I'm grateful for that. And when you do gratitude, be sure that you're also grateful for things that relate to you. So it's not just the external and your family, but also things that come from you. So gratitude is a big part, and it's a big strategy for staying resilient. Okay, so those are some really concrete strategies that I'm giving you. And I want to talk a little bit more about another strategy that's called, or that what I would call the role of purpose and mission. And I talked about Nicaragua. And for me, one of my strategies was to remind myself what my purpose was and what the mission was. If you haven't taken some time to really figure out why you're here and what you're doing and what your mission is and your purpose, I suggest that you do it. I almost always work with my clients on that immediately. I want to know what their values are, and I want to know, why are you here? And it doesn't always have to have this sort of super existential answer. It could just be, something that relates to the family. I'm here because I want to raise my family and I want to do a good job, or I'm here because, I want to do a good job at work. And of course, we also get into these bigger conversations about, why am I here? What's my purpose on the planet? And the more information that you have about that, the clearer you are, the easier it is for you to stay resilient. Because at the end of the day, if I had a bad day, then I go back to that and I say, I'm here because my purpose is, and it will always, always pull me forward. It might take a while, but it gives me strength. And, you can say, well, do we really need to have a purpose? And I say, it doesn't really matter. Use it. If it works for you, even if it's fake, it's like there's always the placebo effect. Use it, because for most of us, when we know what our purpose is of what we want to accomplish here, what we want to create, and it could be, I want to spread love, or I want to make the world a better place, or I want to make a difference, or I want to have more beauty in the world. It really helps you in the difficult times when, it seems like everything is super grim. Survivors often become advocates. So when you have been traumatized, one of the ways that people deal with that and they build it into their purpose and into their mission is that they now are the ones that help other people, move forward, whatever that is. So those are some of the strategies. I see we've been talking for about half hour or so, and I want to do a little bit of a recap and just sort of briefly repeat the strategies that I've been mentioning. So we have emotional, we have mental, and some of you might actually say there's also spiritual, and for sure. And the emotional strategies that I talked about is to make room and to acknowledge your emotions. We talked about going into the tube, allowing yourself to go down, hit the bottom, because you naturally bounce back up. We also talked about talking to a friend, talking to a coach, making sure that you have a strong support system. And, some of my people that I coach, they feel like they don't really have that support system. So, guys, get one, create one, go out and find some people that you can develop and that they can be your good friends. I know that doesn't happen overnight, but it's really important that you do it. Talked about freeform writing, taking a piece of paper and getting everything on that piece of paper and maybe quieting your emotions a little bit and then destroying that piece of paper. Talked about mindfulness. We talked about distraction, healthy choices such as exercise, maybe reading, maybe listening to a podcast, going for a walk. And also, I'm not sure I talked about this, is cognitive reframing. So it's the ability to reframe something and look at this. Byron Katie does wonderful work in her with her questioning. One of the questions I sometimes use with my clients: how can I really know that this is true? And it speaks to our emotions always telling us that this is the truth. And it also challenges our beliefs, our thoughts, and gives us the opportunity to open the door a little bit and so that we can see other things. Mentally, we talked about where am I going? We talked about acknowledgement and championing. Again, support system, I think, also supports mental resilience, creating realistic goals, self-care routines, gratitude, and the bigger work of making sure that you have a mission, that you have a purpose, and that you have a sense of where you're going. Years ago, my brother wrote this poem in my poetry book. And if you're from Germany, like I am, and I don't know if they still do it, but in my generation, they still did. When you were about 10 years old, mainly the girls, they got this little book, often from their mother or their godmother. And the idea was to pass this around to the people in your class and the important people in your life. And you ask them kind of like for a poem or for a blessing. And my brother wrote this poem, and it's by Rainer Maria Rilke. And I will translate it for you. I translate it in English. So here it goes. It's maybe not perfect, but whenever you think you can't go on, a little light from somewhere will come along so that you can overcome it once again and sing of sunshine and joy. And just for the kicks, I'm going to read it to you in German. Immer wenn du meinst, es geht nicht mehr, kommt von irgendwo ein Lichtlein her, dass du es noch einmal zwingst und von Sonnenschein und Freude singst. So this is a poem that stuck with me and is still with me. So I say to you, sometimes when everything fails, just imagine that there's a light, maybe light a candle, maybe turn the light on, and just map that into the end of the tunnel so that you can visualize it, because inevitably, there will be light and the darkness will be over. And it just takes a little tiny spark. And as soon as you see the spark, the darkness will go away. So that's what I'm leaving with you today. Imagine yourself at the end of the tunnel with a little light in your pocket, in your hand, and then practice these strategies of resilience. If you liked what you heard today, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter that goes out once or twice a month. If you're more interested in working with me and learning more about neuroemotional coaching and kinesiology and how to change your deeper layers of consciousness, you can book a 30-minute introduction session with me on my website, clearintentions.net. And I wish you all the best. And if you have more questions about how to stay resilient, let me know, and I'll be happy to answer you. So for today, keep that light burning and have a great day. Take care.